As the night draped its heavy cloak over the land, a solitary figure navigated the murky waters, veiled in the folds of a dark cloak that danced with the rhythm of the river's gentle current. The boat, weathered and worn, creaked softly as it glided through the winding channels, its wooden frame echoing the sighs of the restless wind. In the stillness of the night, the only sounds that dared to break the silence were the haunting whispers of the reeds, swaying mournfully along the riverbanks, and the occasional splash as the prow of the boat sliced through the water. The air was thick with anticipation, each breath tinged with the scent of damp earth and decay. As the boat emerged from the narrow confines of the river, the darkness yielded to reveal a vast expanse of water, cloaked in a swirling mist that seemed to devour all light in its path. In the distance, a solitary island beckoned, its silhouette dominated by the jagged remains of a once grand shipwreck, now a haunting monument to the perils of the sea. Surrounding the island, gnarled trees loomed like silent sentinels, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers against the backdrop of the night sky. Shadows danced amidst the tangled undergrowth, their forms shifting and twisting with each passing gust of wind. As the figure drew closer to the island, a sense of foreboding washed over them, a palpable weight that hung heavy in the air. Yet still, they pressed on, drawn inexorably towards the heart of the darkness that awaited them amidst the wreckage and the trees. Once the boat was pulled relentlessly towards the island's shore, Headmistress Althalia's consciousness stirred within the depths of her comatose state. Fragmented images and disjointed thoughts flickered through her mind like shards of broken glass, each one a puzzle piece in a larger, incomprehensible picture. Sensations washed over her in waves, disjointed and disorienting. The musty scent of damp wood mingled with the sharp tang of salt in the air, while the distant echoes of rustling leaves and creaking branches whispered of unseen dangers lurking in the shadows. Confusion clouded her thoughts as she struggled to make sense of her surroundings. Where was she? How had she come to be here? And most urgently, who was she with? Faces flickered through her mind, their features blurred and indistinct. Friends, foes, or merely strangers in the tangled web of her fractured memories. Fear gnawed at the edges of her consciousness, a primal instinct warning her of imminent danger. Yet alongside the fear, a spark of determination flickered to life within her, driving her forward despite the overwhelming uncertainty that surrounded her. As the boat ground to a halt upon the sandy shore, Althalia's mind raced with questions, her every instinct urging her to unravel the mysteries that lay hidden amidst the darkness of the island. For within its depths, she sensed not only the answers to her own identity, but perhaps the key to unlocking the secrets that had brought her to this enigmatic place. With a swift and decisive motion, the mysterious figure reached down and hoisted Headmistress Althalia's limp form over their shoulder, effortlessly bearing her weight despite the heaviness of her waterlogged clothes. As she was jostled into motion, Althalia's mind whirled with a fresh onslaught of questions, each one clamoring for attention amidst the chaos of her thoughts. Who was this person, and what did they want with her? The strength evident in their muscles, firm and taut against her own body, spoke of a power that belied their shrouded form. Was this stranger friend, or foe, ally, or adversary? As she was carried through the darkness, the rhythmic sway of their movements became a steady cadence, lulling Althalia into a strange sense of resignation. Despite the urgency of her situation, there was a curious comfort in the solidity of their presence, a silent reassurance that she was not alone in the vast expanse of the night. Yet beneath the surface calm, a primal instinct stirred within her, a whisper of warning that urged her to remain vigilant. For though the figure's intentions remained veiled in shadow, Althalia knew that the answers she sought lay not only in the depths of her own memories, but in the enigmatic heart of the one who now carried her through the darkness. While the mysterious figure carried Headmistress Althalia through the tangled undergrowth towards the heart of the island, a sense of purpose burned within him, driving him ever onwards towards his ultimate goal. With each step, the air grew heavy with the weight of centuries past, the very stones beneath his feet echoing with the whispers of forgotten sorrows. Approaching the looming silhouette of the ancient fortress, he placed down the headmistress onto a plateau of stone and moss in the center of the ruins and walked towards the area, kneeling down towards it. With a deft touch, the figure traced his fingers along the weathered stones, seeking out the hidden sigils and runes that lay concealed within the ancient carvings. With each gesture, the air crackled with latent energy, the very earth trembling beneath the weight of his arcane power. And then, at last, he found it. A hidden passage, much like a trap-door, concealed amidst the rubble and decay, its entrance obscured by the passage of time and growing foliage. With a whispered incantation, the figure spoke the words of power that would awaken the ancient magic slumbering within the fortress's depths. As the incantation reached its crescendo, a blinding light erupted from the heart of the ruins, illuminating the darkness with an ethereal glow. Shadows danced and twisted amidst the swirling maelstrom of magic, their forms shifting and coalescing into shapes both strange and wondrous. And then, with a final surge of power, the gateway opened, its shimmering threshold beckoning the figure onwards into the unknown. He looked up and over towards the headmistress and walked towards her with his mysterious swagger. The headmistress could barely keep her eyes open and reluctantly fell unconscious. The figure chuckled gently with a menacing laugh. Replacing the headmistress back up onto his shoulder, the figure stepped through the portal, his every sense ablaze with the promise of untold power and forbidden knowledge awaiting him on the other side that he had wanted for well over a century. Just as the mysterious figure and Headmistress Althalia stepped through the shimmering portal, the figure found himself looking around at their surroundings. The air was laced with musk, and the distant sound of the rustling of leaves is suffused with the faint scent of the growing moss and dusty tomes. They stood within the heart of a vast, sprawling dungeon, its stone walls weathered and worn by rainwater and sea salt. Above them, towering archways stretched towards the ceiling, their once grandeur now faded into shadowed memory. Yet despite the desolation that surrounded them, there was a strange beauty to the place, a haunting elegance that spoke of secrets long buried and power long forgotten. Carvings marked the walls, their faded scratches hinting at scenes of bygone glory and ancient battles. Strange symbols and sigils danced amidst the intricate patterns, their meanings lost to the mists of time. Torch sconces lined the way forward, casting flickering shadows that danced and twisted with each passing gust of wind. But it was not the physical surroundings alone that marked this place as magical. No, it was the very essence of the air itself, alive with the hum of latent power and the whispers of ancient spells. Runes glowed with an ethereal light, their intricate designs pulsing with the heartbeat of the magic that flowed through them. Each step the figure took sent ripples through the fabric of reality, their presence echoing in the very stones of the fortress. And as they delved deeper into the room, they could feel the power of the place seeping into their bones, filling them with a sense of awe and wonder that bordered on the divine. In this enchanted space, time seemed to stand still, its boundaries blurred and indistinct. For within the confines of the dungeon, anything seemed possible now. It was as if this place was a million miles away and out of reach of anybody. meaning that in this location, anything goes. Such power could overtake even the strongest of souls. As the mysterious figure gently lowered Headmistress Althalia to the cold stone floor of the dungeon, a surge of urgency seized her. With a heart pounding in her chest, she surged forward, her hands reaching out to grasp the folds of the dark cloak that concealed the figure's identity. With a swift and determined motion, she tore down the hood, revealing the face hidden beneath. But what she saw before her was not the face of a stranger, nor the visage of an ally. Instead, it was a face she had known all too well, a face that had once been a beacon of wisdom and guidance in her darkest hours. Professor Embervare. As the truth washed over her, Althalia's heart shattered into a million pieces. She traced the familiar contours of his face, her fingers trembling with disbelief and sorrow. The lines of age etched upon his brow, the weariness in his eyes, all spoke of a journey fraught with pain and regret. Tears welled in Althalia's eyes as she came to terms with the betrayal before her. This man, whom she had trusted implicitly, had deceived her in the most profound way imaginable. The realization cut her to the core, leaving her feeling adrift in a sea of uncertainty and despair. For at that moment, Althalia knew that she could no longer trust the man before her. The bond they had shared, forged through years of camaraderie and shared purpose, lay shattered at her feet. And as the weight of that betrayal settled upon her shoulders, she felt as though she had lost not only a friend, but a part of herself as well. With a heavy heart, Althalia turned away from Embervare, her eyes clouded with tears. She knew that the path ahead would be fraught with peril, and that she would need to steel herself against the trials that lay in wait. But deep down, she also knew that she would never be the same again. She had always found solace and peace in the comforting words of her friend. This betrayal of a trusted professor cuts deeper than any blade could. Headmistress Althalia's voice trembled with a mixture of anguish and betrayal as she confronted Professor Embervare amidst the dimly lit corridors of the enchanted dungeon. "Embervare," she whispered, her voice barely above a hoarse murmur, "how utterly low you have fallen." Embervare's gaze faltered beneath the weight of her accusation, his features twisted with a tumult of conflicting emotions. "Althalia, please," he implored, his voice tinged with regret. "You must understand, I did what I had to do. You know this isn't like me at all." Althalia's eyes blazed with a fierce intensity as she met his gaze, her fists clenched at her sides. "Understand?" She spat at the floor in front of him, her words dripping with venom. "Understand how you've torn apart everything we've built together? How have you betrayed not just me, but all those who trusted in you?" Embervare's shoulders slumped in defeat as he struggled to find the words to explain himself. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he confessed, his voice breaking. "Malachy, he forced my hand. He promised me my wife back, her immortality even, so we could be together again, if only I would aid him in his quest." Althalia's eyes widened in disbelief, her mind reeling at the revelation. "Malachy?" she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. "But he's a monster. You put your faith in someone who murdered innocent families, people you loved." Embervare nodded solemnly, a shadow of remorse clouding his features. "I know," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "But I was blinded by my own ambition, my own desire to just hold her in my arms once more. I thought I could control him, use him to further my own ends. But now, I see the folly of my ways." Tears welled in Althalia's eyes as she listened to Embervare's confession, her heart torn between anger and sorrow. "And what of us, Embervare?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "What of the bond we once shared, the trust that we held so dear? Has it all been for naught? Embervert's gaze softened as he reached out to grasp her trembling hands on his own. No, Althalia, he vowed, his voice filled with a newfound determination. I swear to you, I will make amends for the pain I have caused. I will do whatever it takes to set things right, to reclaim the trust that I have so foolishly squandered. I just didn't know what else to do. But as Althalia looked into Embervert's eyes, she knew that the wounds he had inflicted upon their relationship would not easily heal. For in that moment, she realized that the man she had once called a friend had become a stranger to her, his actions forever staining the fabric of their shared history. And though she longed to believe in the possibility of redemption, she knew that the road ahead would be fraught with uncertainty and peril, a journey into the depths of darkness from which there might be no return. With a heavy heart, Headmistress Althalia retreated to the solitude of an open prison cell, its cold stone walls offering a semblance of refuge amidst the chaos that engulfed her. As she sank onto the rough-hewn bench within, she cast her gaze across the shadowed expanse of the dungeon, her eyes fixed upon the figure of Professor Embervert in the distance. The flickering torchlight cast dancing shadows upon the walls, their shifting forms a reflection of the turmoil that raged within Althalia's own heart. Memories of happier times flooded her mind, a bittersweet symphony of laughter and camaraderie that now seemed a distant echo of the past. But amidst the shadows, there was also a glimmer of hope, a flicker of determination that refused to be extinguished. For though Embervert's betrayal had left her wounded and broken, Althalia knew that she could not allow herself to succumb to despair. There were still battles to be fought, still truths to be uncovered in the darkness that lay ahead. With a heavy sigh, Althalia leaned back against the cold stone wall, her eyes never wavering from Embervert's distant form. Though their bond had been shattered by his betrayal, she could not deny the lingering spark of connection that still bound them together, however tenuously. And as she sat within the confines of the open cell, she thought to spark up conversation at least. Maybe she could understand his intentions. Althalia resolved to confront the challenges that lay ahead with courage and determination. For though the road ahead would be fraught with peril and uncertainty, she knew that she could not allow herself to falter in the face of adversity. With her gaze fixed upon the shadows that danced across the dungeon floor, Headmistress Althalia steeled herself for the trials that lay ahead, her heart heavy with the weight of betrayal, yet hopeful for the possibility of redemption. Althalia's voice was steady, but tinged with a raw edge of emotion as she sought answers from Embervert, her eyes fixed on his shadowed figure across the dungeon. "Embervert," she began, her tone both imploring and resolute, "there's so much you haven't told me. What happened to your wife? Why did you turn to someone like Malachy for help?" Embervert's shoulders tensed at the mention of his past, his gaze drifting to the floor as if weighed down by the burden of his memories. "Her name was Sophia," he murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper. "She was everything to me. She died during childbirth, leaving me without her warmth and without the light of her likeness in a child either." Althalia's heart clenched at the pain etched upon Embervert's face, her own empathy mingling with a growing sense of urgency. "And Malachy?" she pressed, her voice gentle yet insistent. "Why did you think he could help you?" Embervert's gaze flickered with a mixture of regret and bitterness as he turned to face her, his eyes searching hers for understanding. I thought he could bring her back to me," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought he could undo the mistakes of the past, the choices that led to her death." Althalia's breath caught in her throat at the revelation, her mind reeling at the depth of Embervert's grief. "But Malachy?" She trailed off, her voice barely a whisper. Embervert nodded solemnly, his expression haunted by the memories of his past. "I was a fool to believe in him," he admitted, his voice heavy with remorse. "He promised me, if I only did this one act of kidnapping, that he would bring her back from the dead, give her and me immortality. Yet then, days later, after I signed that contract, I realized his form, what is now, is due to his immortality, the pain he carries with him. I will be no better than him." But as Altalia looked into Embervert's eyes, she knew that the wounds he had inflicted upon their relationship would not easily heal. For in that moment, she realized that the man she had once called a friend had become a stranger to her, his actions forever staining the fabric of their shared history. And though she longed to believe in the possibility of redemption, she knew that the road ahead would be fraught with uncertainty and peril, a journey into the depths of darkness from which there might be no return. With a heavy heart, Headmistress Althalia retreated to the solitude of an open prison cell, its cold stone walls offering a semblance of refuge amidst the chaos that engulfed her. As she sank onto the rough-hewn bench within, she cast her gaze across the shadowed expanse of the dungeon, her eyes fixed upon the figure of Professor Embervert in the distance. The flickering torchlight cast dancing shadows upon the walls, their shifting forms a reflection of the turmoil that raged within Althalia's own heart. Memories of happier times flooded her mind, a bittersweet symphony of laughter and camaraderie that now seemed a distant echo of the past. But amidst the shadows, there was also a glimmer of hope, a flicker of determination that refused to be extinguished. For though Embervert's betrayal had left her wounded and broken, Althalia knew that she could not allow herself to succumb to despair. There were still battles to be fought, still truths to be uncovered in the darkness that lay ahead. With a heavy sigh, Althalia leaned back against the cold stone wall, her eyes never wavering from Embervert's distant form. Though their bond had been shattered by his betrayal, she could not deny the lingering spark of connection that still bound them together, however tenuously. And as she sat within the confines of the open cell, she thought to spark up conversation at least, maybe she could understand his intentions. Althalia resolved to confront the challenges that lay ahead with courage and determination. For though the road ahead would be fraught with peril and uncertainty, she knew that she could not allow herself to falter in the face of adversity. With her gaze fixed upon the shadows that danced across the dungeon floor, Headmistress Althalia steeled herself for the trials that lay ahead, her heart heavy with the weight of betrayal, yet hopeful for the possibility of redemption. Althalia's voice was steady, but tinged with a raw edge of emotion as she sought answers from Embervert, her eyes fixed on his shadowed figure across the dungeon. "Embervert," she began, her tone both imploring and resolute, "there's so much you haven't told me. What happened to your wife? Why did you turn to someone like Malachy for help?" Embervert's shoulders tensed at the mention of his past, his gaze drifting to the floor as if weighed down by the burden of his memories. "Her name was Sophia," he murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper. "She was everything to me. She died during childbirth, leaving me without her warmth and without the light of her likeness in a child either." Altalia's heart clenched at the pain etched upon Embervert's face, her own empathy mingling with a growing sense of urgency. "And Malachy?" she pressed, her voice gentle yet insistent. "Why did you think he could help you?" Embervert's gaze flickered with a mixture of regret and bitterness as he turned to face her, his eyes searching hers for understanding. I thought he could bring her back to me," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought he could undo the mistakes of the past, the choices that led to her death." Althalia's breath caught in her throat at the revelation, her mind reeling at the depth of Embervert's grief. "But Malachy?" She trailed off, her voice barely a whisper. Embervert nodded solemnly, his expression haunted by the memories of his past. "I was a fool to believe in him," he admitted, his voice heavy with remorse. "He promised me, if I only did this one act of kidnapping, that he would bring her back from the dead, give her and me immortality. Yet then, days later, after I signed that contract, I realized his form, what is now, is due to his immortality, the pain he carries with him. I will be no better than him." As the weight of Embervert's confessions settled upon her shoulders, Althalia felt a surge of compassion for the man before her, his vulnerability laid bare in the harsh light of truth. And though their bond had been fractured by betrayal, she could not deny the flicker of humanity that still burned within him, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness that threatened to consume them both. With a heavy sigh, Althalia reached out to him, her hand trembling as it brushed against his own. "Embervert," she murmured softly, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Please, after all these years, Vivian, call me Cyber." As the fragile peace between Headmistress Althalia and Cyber hung in the air, a sudden shift in the atmosphere shattered the tranquility of the moment. A low, ominous rumble reverberated through the dungeon, its source hidden within the depths of the shadows that surrounded them. Althalia's breath caught in her throat as a chill swept through the air, raising the hairs on the back of her neck. "Cyber?" she said urgently, her voice tinged with fear. "Do you feel that?" Cyber's eyes widened in alarm as he too sensed the dark presence that loomed over them, his hands instinctively reaching for the arcane energies that pulsed within his grasp. "That's him," he muttered, his voice tight with apprehension. "He knows you are here now." As the tension mounted, the very air seemed to thrum with a palpable sense of foreboding. Shadows writhed and twisted upon the walls, their forms contorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, growing closer to them both. And then, with a deafening roar, the darkness erupted into being, a swirling vortex of blackened mist that coalesced into a towering figure of unfathomable power. Its eyes gleamed with a malevolent light source, its presence casting a suffocating pall over the dungeon. Althalia's heart hammered in her chest as she beheld the creature before her, its very essence a manifestation of all that was twisted and corrupted in the world. "Now I see you, Malachy, you coward!" she shouted with hatred, her voice trembling with fear. Cyber's jaw clenched as he struggled to maintain his composure in the face of such overwhelming darkness. "You cannot take her soul, Malachy. You must only have mine," he stated, his voice low and serious. "I will give you my essence, my life source and power, and I want nothing in return. Only that she goes free." As the creature advanced towards them in a billowing wind of darkness, its steps echoed like thunder upon the stone floor. Althalia and Cyber braced themselves for the inevitable confrontation that lay ahead. For in that moment, they knew that they stood not only against a formidable foe, but against the face of the darkest magic itself. A tense silence fell over the dungeon as the dark spirit loomed menacingly before them, its malevolent presence suffocating the air with an aura of unbridled power. Althalia's heart raced in her chest as she braced herself for the impending confrontation, her senses heightened to a fever pitch. But before she could even draw breath to speak to the darkness, tragedy struck with a sudden and devastating ferocity. In a blur of movement too swift for mortal eyes to follow, the dark spirit lashed out with a single lethal blow, its razor-sharp claws tearing through the fabric of the mist. Althalia's scream echoed through the chamber as she watched in horror, She could feel the rush of the claw going past her face as everything slowed down, including her own scream. Nothing but silence resumed. You could hear nothing but the whimpers she was making. Stepping forward towards Cyber's turned back, she reaches out to his shoulder and, like parchment burnt by fire, his body turned into particles of ash. His entire being flew upward to the moonlit sky above her, and with the sound of a man's last breath, he was gone. Tears streamed down Althalia's cheeks, stained by pain as she fell to her knees, motionless, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch the last embers. "Cyber," she choked out, her voice a hoarse whisper filled with grief and disbelief. "I don't want to live if you can't." But there was no response, no comforting words of reassurance or solace. For in that moment, Cyber was gone, his light extinguished by the darkness that now threatened to consume them both. As Althalia cradled Cyber's final ashes in her hands, a fierce determination burned within her, a resolve to honor his memory by continuing the fight against Malachy, who had claimed his life. For though she may be battered and broken, she would not allow herself to be consumed by despair. With a heavy heart and tears streaming down her cheeks, Althalia rose to her feet, her eyes blazing with a newfound determination. For in the face of overwhelming darkness, she knew that she was all that stood between the new world Cyber dreamed of and total oblivion. And though the road ahead would be fraught with peril and uncertainty, she would not falter in her quest to bring light to the darkest corners of the realm. As the tension in the dungeon reached its breaking point, a sudden shift in the air signaled the arrival of a new presence. Althalia's heart skipped a beat as a figure emerged from the swirling darkness, its form shrouded in shadow and mystery for a second. But as the darkness began to recede, revealing the figure within, Althalia felt a wave of shock and disbelief wash over her. For standing before her was not the twisted visage of Malachy, but the familiar form of someone she had once known and trusted. Her mind raced with memories of days long past, of laughter and camaraderie shared with this person who now stood before her. Visions of their youth flashed before her eyes, their carefree days spent exploring the halls of the academy and teasing their professors with youthful abandon. Althalia's breath caught in her throat as she beheld the face of her old friend, its features etched with a mixture of sorrow and regret. "Malachy," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. But even as she spoke his name, the headmistress felt guilty for even acknowledging him. Through the eyes of Headmistress Althalia, Malachy emerged from the shadows, his form a haunting blend of beauty and malevolence. Long, ebony strands of hair cascaded around his chiseled features, framing his face in a dark halo that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly allure. A slight curl at the ends added an air of wildness to his appearance, hinting at the untamed power that lay beneath the surface. His eyes, icy blue and piercing, seemed to bore into Althalia's soul, their intensity unnerving yet captivating all at once. They held a depth of knowledge and darkness that sent shivers down her spine, a chilling reminder of the depths of despair that lurked within him. Clad in dark robes adorned with silver patterns that glimmered in the dim torchlight, Malachy exuded an aura of menace and foreboding. Each movement was deliberate and calculated, every gesture imbued with an unsettling grace that belied the darkness that lurked within. His hands, large and rough, bore the marks of untold centuries of darkness, their blackened nails curved into talon-like points that seemed to gleam with an otherworldly sheen. And beneath the pallor of his snow-white skin, veins pulsed with an unearthly energy, their dark tendrils snaking across his flesh like roots of some ancient, malevolent tree. As Althalia beheld Malachy's form, A sense of dread washed over her, a primal instinct warning her of the danger that he represented. For though his appearance may have been beguiling, she knew that beneath the surface lurked a darkness that threatened to consume all who dared to stand in its path. As Althalia mustered the courage to object to Malachi's presence, a sudden surge of dark energy crackled through the air. Before she could utter another word, Malachi raised his hand in a swift and decisive motion, his lips moving in a silent incantation that sent shivers down Althalia's spine. With a deafening roar, the dungeon seemed to tremble as the very fabric of reality twisted and contorted around them. Althalia's eyes widened in horror as she watched in disbelief as the cell door before her began to shimmer and warp, its once solid form bending and twisting with unnatural force. "No!" she cried out, her voice filled with desperation as she lunged towards the door, her hands outstretched in a futile attempt to stop Malachi's dark magic with her own. But it was too late. With a final surge of power, the cell door sealed shut with an ominous clang, its iron bars glowing with an otherworldly light. Althalia pounded against the door with all her might, her cries of defiance echoing through the chamber as she realized the full extent of Malachi's treachery. "Malachi!" she screamed, her voice echoing with rage and despair. "You cannot hold me here forever. Others will be coming for me." But there was no response, no sign that Malachi had even heard her pleas. As the reality of her situation sank in, Althalia sank to the floor, her heart heavy with the weight of her imprisonment. Trapped within the confines of the cell, with Malachi's dark presence looming over her like a spectre of doom, Althalia knew that she was facing the greatest challenge of her life. And though the road ahead would be fraught with peril and uncertainty, she vowed to never give up hope, to never surrender to the darkness that threatened to consume her. As Malachi approached the cell door, his eyes smoldering with a mixture of rage and resentment, memories of a time long past flooded his mind. "Do you remember, Vivian?" he hissed, his voice dripping with bitterness. "Do you remember the days when we were young, when our laughter echoed through the streets of Elder Valley? Your mother, your father wouldn't console you, too busy with their work. You were all alone, scared about your future as a witch too poor to attend the academy. Do you remember my sacrifices for you?" Vivian's heart skipped up into her mouth at the mention of their childhood, memories of happier times mingling with the pain of what now is. "Don't do this. You are not innocent in this, Malachi," she replied, her voice tinged with sadness. "You have no right to have a hold on me anymore." But as the memories of their youth gave way to the harsh realities of their adolescence, Malachi's expression darkened with a storm of anger and resentment. "And what of our time at the academy, Althalia?" he demanded, his voice laced with accusations. "Do you remember how we ruled the halls with our pranks and our mischief? How were we feared and respected by our peers and professors alike? How you once said to me, you would never leave me." Her eyes softened with a mixture of nostalgia and regret as she nodded in agreement. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But that was a lifetime ago, Malachi. You have changed," he scoffed, his voice filled with derision. "You think I've changed, do you? You think I've forgotten what you did to me?" She recoiled at the venom in Malachi's words, her heart pounding in her chest as she braced herself for the onslaught of his anger. "What are you talking about, Malachi?" she demanded, her voice tinged with fear. "What did I do to you exactly?" But Malachi's rage was relentless, his words spilling forth like a torrent of venomous bile. "The morning of the fire I set ablaze. You know why I did that, don't you? Why did so many die that day? Yet you forget your part in it, don't you?" He spat, his eyes blazing with fury. "You rejected me, just like all the others. After all we've been through, after all I've done for you, you cast me aside like I was nothing, and my heart didn't just break, it actually grew, Vivienne. It grew out of my darkness." As her eyes widened in shock as she listened to Malachi's accusations, her mind started reeling with disbelief. "Malachi, she began, her voice faltering as she struggled to find the words to defend herself. But before she could speak another word, Malachi's rage reached its boiling point, his fists slamming against the cell door with a deafening crash. "No more lies! You filthy slime of a being!" he roared, his voice echoing through the chamber like a thunderclap. "No more excuses! You left me there waiting for you, that altar laying bare my feelings for you, yet you never arrived. I never saw your veiled features, your stunning eyes through the mesh of your veil. You didn't take our union further than words." And with that, Malachi turned on his heel and reached out towards the cell door as he materialized himself through the wood. With an aura of dark energy swirling around him, the dungeon seemed to tremble in anticipation of his arrival. The air crackled with a palpable sense of malevolence, sending shivers down Althalia's spine as she watched him draw nearer. From her perspective, Malachi's form seemed to flicker and warp as he reached out towards the solid iron bars of the cell door. The air hummed with arcane energy as he muttered a dark incantation under his breath, his hands glowing with an otherworldly light. With a sudden and jarring shift, the cell door began to shimmer and warp before her eyes, its once solid form bending and contorting with unnatural force. The iron bars seemed to twist and writhe as if alive, their surfaces pulsing with an eerie glow that cast strange shadows across the chamber. As the transformation reached its climax, Malachi stepped through the threshold of the cell door, his form bathed in an ethereal light that seemed to emanate from within. His features were twisted with a mixture of rage and triumph, his eyes gleaming with a sinister light as he fixed his gaze upon Vivienne. But from her perspective, the sight of Malachi materializing through the closed and locked cell door was a surreal and terrifying experience. As she looked up at him from her place on the cold stone floor, she felt a surge of fear and helplessness wash over her, her heart pounding in her chest as she realized the extent of Malachi's power. From her vantage point, Malachi seemed to loom over her like a rain cloud, his form surrounded by a swirling vortex of dark energy that seemed to consume everything in its path. His eyes bore into hers with an intensity that made her feel uncomfortable, their depths filled with a hunger that chilled her to the bone. And as Malachi stood before her, his presence casting a shadow over her very soul, Vivienne knew that she was facing the greatest challenge of her life. Trapped within the confines of the cell, with Malachi's dark presence looming over her like a shadowy spectre, she knew that she would need to summon all her strength and courage to stand against the darkness that threatened to consume her. As Malachi stood before Vivienne, his eyes ablaze with a hunger that seemed to pierce straight to her soul, the air crackled with a palpable tension that sent shivers down her spine. In that moment, she could feel the weight of his gaze upon her, a heat that seemed to sear her very skin as he drank in her beauty with an intensity that was both intoxicating and unnerving. There was a primal magnetism to Malachi's presence, an allure that transcended mere physical attraction and delved into the depths of desire itself. His voice, when he spoke, was like velvet against her skin, a soft caress that sent a shiver of anticipation coursing through her veins. "Vivienne," he murmured, his voice low and husky with longing, "you have always been the one I desired above all others. Your beauty, your grace, they have haunted my dreams for centuries." Vivian's heart pounded in her chest as she listened to Malachi's words, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she struggled to comprehend the depth of his desire. There was a dangerous allure to his words, a seductive power that threatened to ensnare her in a web of desire from which there could be no escape. But amidst the tumult of her emotions, there was also a flicker of something else, something deeper and more profound. For though Malachi's lust burned bright and fierce, there was also a tenderness in his gaze, a yearning that spoke of a longing for connection that went beyond mere physical desire. As Malachi reached out to touch her, his fingers brushing against her cheek with a feather-light caress, Vivian felt a surge of electricity shoot through her veins. It was as if every nerve in her body was alive with sensation, every touch sending ripples of pleasure cascading through her being. And as they stood there, locked in a dance of desire and longing, Vivian knew that she was teetering on the edge of something momentous. For in Malachi's embrace, she could feel the stirrings of a passion that went beyond the confines of the mortal realm, a love that transcended time and space itself. In that moment, as their lips met in a fervent kiss that ignited a firestorm of passion between them, Vivian knew that she wouldn't allow this to continue. She had to fight him or else. And though their love they share may be fraught with danger and uncertainty, something she craved, she knew that she would follow Malachi to the ends of the earth and beyond if she let him consume her. For in his arms she had found a love that was truly inevitable once upon a time. Malachi's embrace grew harsher around her body, an intensity that borders on obsession. Vivian felt her spine recoiling slightly in an urge to get away from him. Every fiber of her is trapped between the wall and his heavy frame. His hands, that were gentle, are now grasping at parts of her she didn't feel comfortable with. Yet she felt the need to give in, just so he thought maybe she was interested. Feeling the soft fabrics of her clothes tearing under his grip on her. He sniffs her neck, and she turns her face away from him, her eyes forced shut, her breath quivering, but not from excitement, but utter outrage. Alarm bells ringing in her head as his touch grew more and more invasive. However, as Malachi's body pressed harder against her own, and she felt his breath on her face and skin grow hotter. In her fierce surge of anger, she reached out towards a shard of jagged glass that had seemed to lay dormant on that cold floor for many moons. Its dusty outline is imprinted onto the ground. She swung her arm that had it clenched tightly in a fist until her veins of her palm were pierced, making her bleed down her arm. Just as the full force of the swing punched him near his eye socket, she plunged the dagger-shaped piece of glass into his eye, hard enough it made him stagger backward. But much to her surprise, there wasn't much of a reaction from him, other than a slight confusion to his face as to why she had attacked him. At that moment, it was as though everything was suspended in time. Malachi raised his hand that was now shaking towards the shard and proceeded to remove it gently from his face. As he replaced the hand by his side, the fist drenched in his blood, she could see from his remaining eye how much hurt he felt from her in that moment. Vivian couldn't help but deep down feel sorry for him. He's a shell of himself, she thought. She knew she was part of his demise and part of the reason for his hatred of the world. There's a moment of clarity that crossed his face in the moment that they stared into each other's eyes, and he spoke loud and clear so much that it made her heart pound nearly out of her chest. "You really believe I'm a monster, don't you?" She looked away from him and sadly nodded her head, clutching at the rags of her clothes that once hid her modesty, that now flowed freely, revealing part of her chest. She felt maybe now he understood the fear the world felt towards him. She could see a glimmer of hope piercing through the shadows. Malachi, limp and lifeless, felt the need to rest himself against some wooden boxes that rested against the wall at the opposite end of where the cells were. He turns to face Vivienne, and she watches on in amazement as his darker magics mend his eye and form it into an intricately placed scar where the eye used to be. For a moment, she felt guilty that his beautiful eyes had been damaged by her, but then she realized it needed to happen, regardless of his deep-rooted feelings from her past. "Well, I thought maybe you could love me again. Sounds stupid, doesn't it?" He looks up at himself in a hanging mirror that's misted by moisture and cracked down one side of the glass. "I thought, maybe by sheer luck, you would see my power and fall for me again like you did years ago. You always told me that powerful men made you feel safe and protected. Why do you think I became this way? I should have known you better. You liked the idea of adventure, but always were too scared to take it further. That's why I think you never married me, Dot. You knew I would always become this." He gives a slight chuckle, but then looks up towards Vivienne and smirks a wild, evil grin. "Malachi, I did love you. I still think I have part of my heart that yearns for you still, but I can't see past the pain and suffering you caused. To ones I love most and respect most. You killed someone in front of my eyes that I cherished dearly. There's no turning back from that. I love who you once were, not who you became." Malachi laughed a guttural, billowing laugh that reverberates around the room and hurts her ears. His response isn't what she had bargained for. That idiot deserved what he got. He betrayed you after all, and surely that's enough for you to understand I did you a favor. Nothing good comes from traitors. Vivienne's blood starts to boil up with rage at his words, as they are so hurtful and destructive. She has seen the darkest parts of him before, but never this prominent. In the dimly lit chamber, Vivienne stood, her heart heavy with turmoil, her gaze locked with Malachi's intense obsidian eyes. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mixing with the sweat and grime of the battle that raged around them. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest as she reluctantly delved into the forbidden depths of her power, the very forces she had sworn never to embrace. Malachi's voice, a seductive whisper in the darkness, echoed in her mind, urging her on with honeyed words that dripped with deceit and malice. "Yes, Vivienne," he murmured, his voice like a venomous serpent coiling around her soul. "You are stronger than you know. Embrace the darkness within you. Let it consume you, empower you. It feels good, doesn't it? To be powerful." But as Vivienne summoned the dark magics, a maelstrom of pain, guilt, shame, anger, and fear engulfed her. Each incantation felt like a dagger piercing her heart, reminding her of the promises she had made to herself, to never succumb to the same darkness that had consumed Malachi. With each tear that fell, Vivienne felt herself teetering on the edge of oblivion, the abyss of despair yawning wide before her. But amidst the chaos, a flicker of clarity pierced through the doom. She realized that no amount of power could ever fill the void within her, the void that Malachi had so skillfully exploited. And so, as the climax of their confrontation approached, Vivienne halted suddenly, her voice quivering with emotion as she spoke the truth that had long been buried within her. "I will never love you, Malachi," she declared, her words ringing with a defiant resolve. "I refuse to be consumed by the same darkness that plagues you. I won't allow it." In that moment, as she turned her back on him, Vivienne felt a surge of liberation coursing through her veins. It was a power unlike any other, the power of self-realization, of reclaiming her autonomy and her agency. And as she walked away from him, out of the ruins that had once been their battleground, she knew that she was leaving behind not just a former lover, but a prison of her own making. Meanwhile, In the depths of his despair, Malachi watched helplessly as Vivian slipped through his fingers like a wisp of air, her words a bitter echo in the recesses of his mind. He reached out to her, his fingers clawing at the empty air, but he knew deep down that she was gone, lost to him forever. As she disappeared into the night, he was confused why he let her go. A hollow ache consumed him, a gnawing emptiness that no amount of power could ever hope to fill. And in that moment of crushing defeat, Malachi realized with a sinking dread that he would never see her again, that he had lost not just a lover, but his last flicker of humanity. Malachi staggered back, his mind reeling from the shock of what he had heard. The metallic tang of blood from the deceased professor filled his nostrils, and a deep, primal rage surged within him as Vivian left him alone with his thoughts. As the emotional onslaught continued, Malachi's thoughts spun in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Dark desires stirred within him, thoughts of passion, obsession, and lust for Vivienne clouded his mind, mixing with the raw anger and disgust he felt at himself for betraying her. Yet, amidst the chaos of his emotions, flickers of remorse, compassion, and even respect for Vivienne emerged, each fleeting moment of clarity like a beacon in the storm. The scene outside the ruins was a stark contrast to the turmoil within. The professors and students of the school were docking up their old handcrafted wooden boats, each bearing the sigil of their institution proudly upon its bow. With meticulous precision, the professors began to rally their students, preparing them for the battle ahead. Some students were armed with swords and shields protected by cosmic and emotional spells, others with arcane tomes and wands, but all stood ready to defend against whatever dangers lurked within the ruins. Professor Quasar, a seasoned mage cloaked in rainbows with a steely and steady gaze, marshaled his group of students with calm authority. His voice rang out above the din, issuing orders and strategies for the coming fight. Nearby, Professor Veilstorm and Bloomfield, both masters of the elements and cosmic gifts with regal bearing, stood at the head of their own contingent, the students hanging on their every word as they imparted wisdom born of years of combat experience. Meanwhile, Professor Shadowspear, a grizzled veteran of black magic with a rugged demeanor, led his group with a mixture of gruff encouragement and stern discipline. His students, hardened by his type of training, stood resolute, their eyes fixed on the ruins ahead. As the mist swirled and churned over the inky waters, the students watched with bated breath as a figure emerged, gliding through the ethereal haze like a spectre from another realm. Mrs. Perifold, the mystical mentor, appeared before them, her presence commanding respect. Atop the water, a vessel materialized from the depths of the mist, its form shrouded in mystery and grandeur. The boat seemed to transcend time and space, its sleek silhouette cutting through the darkness with an otherworldly grace. The vessel was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, cut with intricate carvings and arcane symbols that glimmered faintly in the moonlight. Its hull, polished to a mirror-like sheen, reflected the stars above like a celestial map guiding its course dot. As Mrs. Perifold drew closer to the shoreline, the students could see the boat in all its splendor. Its prow, adorned with gilded figures of the ancients, rose majestically from the water, while its stern tapered elegantly into the night. The vessel seemed to move with a life of its own, propelled forward by unseen forces as it carried its illustrious passenger towards the awaiting shore. And as Mrs. Perifold stepped gracefully onto the white sand, her presence was like a beacon of authority and mystique, casting a spell over all who beheld her arrival. As Mrs. Perifold gracefully stepped forward, a hushed reverence fell upon the gathered students. But as she moved, they noticed another figure emerging from the mist behind her, a guardian beast, loyal and fierce, bound to her side through the ages. The creature was a marvel to behold, its form both majestic and terrifying in equal measure. It stood tall on 4 powerful legs, its massive frame covered in sleek, obsidian fur that gleamed with an otherworldly sheen in the moonlight. From its broad shoulders rose a set of formidable horns, curved like crescent moons, hinting at the ancient power that coursed through its veins. As the beast approached, a primal scent filled the air, a heady mix of earth and fire that stirred something primal within the onlookers. Its eyes, pools of molten gold, glowed with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the darkness, a silent testament to its unwavering loyalty to its mistress. With a low rumble that echoed across the shoreline, the creature emitted a sound that was both a growl and a purr, a symphony of danger and reassurance that sent shivers down the spines of those who beheld it. As Mrs. Perifold approached, a student stepped forward, offering her a scepter adorned with ancient runes and symbols of power. With a regal nod, she accepted the scepter, her grip firm and unwavering as she mounted the beast with practiced ease. With Mrs. Perifold atop its back, the guardian beast moved with a grace that belied its massive size, each step a testament to its strength and agility. And as they made their way towards the entrance of the ruins, a hush fell over the surrounding mythical beasts, their heads bowing in deference or lifting to emit low, rumbling calls that reverberated through the night. The students and professors, sensing the impending conflict, turned their gaze towards Mrs. Perifold and her guardian beast, their hearts pounding with anticipation. For in that moment, they knew that the time for war had come, and they would stand united against the encroaching darkness, guided by the wisdom and strength of their formidable leader. As the tension mounted and the call to arms echoed through the air, Anne and Riley found themselves flanked by their companions on one side of the gathered students. The battlefield stretched out before them, a sprawling expanse of ruins and mist-shrouded trees, the air thick with the promise of impending conflict. With a shared glance, Anne and Riley knew that they needed to prepare themselves for battle. Channeling the ancient magic that coursed through their veins, they began to weave intricate spells, their hands moving with precision and purpose. In a burst of shimmering light, Anne's attire transformed, the fabric shifting and reforming until she stood clad in armor of gleaming silver, adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to dance with arcane energy. At her side, her loyal companions stood ready, their beasts by their side, each one a formidable ally in the coming fight. Riley's transformation was no less dramatic, his clothing morphing into a sleek, form-fitting suit of midnight black, accentuated with flashes of crimson that seemed to pulse with dark power. And towering above him, Seraphina, his faithful companion and guardian, loomed like a sentinel of the night, her wings unfurled in a display of majestic beauty. Beside them, Ethan stood with his bug-like beasts, their chitinous forms shimmering in the moonlight as they transformed themselves into razor-sharp weapons, ready to defend their master with lethal precision. Lily, with her trusted bear-like beast at her side, watched as it crackled with dark electric energy, its fur standing on end in anticipation of the coming battle. And then there was Nella, the beast that looked so ugly and deformed, transforms into the most beautiful but haunting dire wolf companion weaving in and out of the shadows, its translucent form flickering like a ghostly apparition. Together, they formed a formidable unit, a force to be reckoned with in the face of darkness and despair. As they looked towards their companions, Anne and Riley felt a surge of determination coursing through their veins. They knew that they were not alone in this fight, that together They would stand united against the forces that made them who they were in that very moment. A bittersweet reminder that hope is not always lost in a world of chaos,